Hey, Vinyl community, Jeff back again. I wanted to kind of tell this little story of what I did this weekend. This past Saturday, went to a store we'd never been to before. I actually went to a couple stores we'd never been to before. Brief story. So I don't even have a clue how we got to this point, but my wife at some point looked up something online and she said, "Hey, did you know there's a record store down on 16th Street, which is, I live near Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach is a big tourist zone. We never go there. I have to play down there with the band occasionally, but it's just one of those places you avoid because it's just so much traffic and the parking is horrible, and it's just like we got better beaches to go to. But there's a lot of stores down there, a lot of little stores, and you never know what's down there. You never know what pops up. And so she's like, "Did you know there's a record store down on 16th Street?" I'm like, "No, I did not." She kind of looked it up. It was called the Half Moon Music Store. It listed on one of the reviews or one of the like Yelp pages or something about vinyl records. I swear it did. I'm almost positive it did, because why would we go there? But it did. It was called, I'm pretty sure it was Half Moon Music Store. So anyway, we made a trek down there Saturday. Let's go check it out. We drove around. I thought it was one place. Years ago, I knew there was a place down there years ago, which I referred to as kind of a, I remember the place. I remember standing in front of it when they weren't open, and I remember they had like crystals and some new agey, but kind of, yeah, new agey tarot cards, probably bongs and stuff, type thing. So I refer to some place like that as a head shop, which may be a term that maybe is not used that much today. Not meant to be derogatory, but in my youth, in the 80s, most malls had what we called a head shop, and a head shop is like pothead shop. It was kind of one of those hippie type places where they sold a lot of black light stuff and a lot of tie-dye stuff and a lot of paraphernalia for smoking and stuff like that. Incense, hippie type stuff, might be tarot cards, might be lots of stuff, tie-dye, things like that. So I thought, oh, this must be that place I remember seeing like 15 years ago when I was down there on the beach walking for some reason for a show or something. So I thought I had an idea what it was. I went down there. I'm like, oh, it's not the same place. It's actually over here. They have a sister store across the street, and I'm thinking that might have been the place, even though it looked different. So you had the Half Moon Music Store, and you had the Dark Side of the Moon, and that one did list on there that it had tarot and grunge and some other things. So we went to the Half Moon Music Store. And that was the one that we found online. And then we get in there, and it turns out they don't have any music at all. So, there was a crate of vinyl records tucked under a shelf that looked like it was an afterthought. Somebody probably just gave them some records. They were backwards and forwards. They weren't in ordinate kind of order. They were just thrown in this crate, upside down, backwards, forwards. Most of it was the kind of stuff you'd see in thrift stores. It was the kind of stuff that people didn't really buy. There might have been an Olivia Newton-John album in there. It was an afterthought. But they did not have any music. Everything in that store is music paraphernalia. It was wall-to-wall tie-dye, wall-to-wall hippie-looking clothes, incense, everything with Grateful Dead, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, all of those bands, the Allman Brothers, things like that. It was a 70s decked-out store. They had a whole room that had like this whole bunch of posters. They didn't have an Ozzy poster, but it was just a lot of posters, lots, and mostly all tie-dye. Everything was tie-dye and so many different varieties and a lot of other stuff. So it was music paraphernalia because it had a lot of band names, but zero music, really no music. Music store was really a bad term. And we asked, so my wife bought a tie-dye shirt, and she was checking out, and she goes, "Well, does your sister group across the street, Dark Side of the Moon, do they by chance have any records?" And she's like, "No, the only place I know down here on the beach that has records is a place a couple blocks over, I think, called Thank You for Listening." I'm like, oh, never heard of that. So Googled it real quick on the way back to the car, and I said, okay, it was closer to about 15 blocks, whatever. But it was actually on the same road as the one record store that I go to all the time. I'm thinking, I wonder if they know there's competition down here. I mean, literally probably a mile down the street from where they are. But it was so close to the beach, I never go to that end of the street. We go to that record store. It's about as far as I go on that road. You go further, you're at the beach. As far as I know, there's nothing down there. But there's like, you get right to the beach and there's shops on both sides. I'm like, oh, that's the kind of stuff you never know what is in your neighborhood. And this was just a quick shop. And I thought, okay, well, let's check it out. So I had to pay to park and went into the store. And it seems like it was probably new. It was just white walls and everything. And then he had like a bunch of records in bins. Probably a few hundred albums. Not a whole, and then so the rock and pop collection was maybe 3 bins of maybe, 100 albums. And then he had, a section for funk and a section for jazz, a couple sections for jazz. Jazz was actually a little bigger. So it was a lot of eclectic stuff, but not a whole lot of, rock and stuff. And then I started flipping and I started noticing some of the prices were a bit out of my range for sure. He had an Anthrax Fistful of Metal album, one of the original Megaforce releases, which I don't know if that makes it worth $70, but it was $70. I'm like, no. And I'm seeing some albums that probably would be things I might buy, but they were all 30, 20, 30, 40. I'm like, all of these I could buy reissues for $25 or less. Venom, At War with Satan, $60. I'm like, anyway, I found 1 or 2 albums that caught my eye that were just classic rock albums for under 10 or, But I moved on. I'm like, I'm not buying anything from this place. While I'm doing that, my wife's sitting on the floor. She's over there on the floor flipping through dollar records. And so she was digging into dollar records. And then I moved over and started looking through some of the jazz stuff. And then she's like, well, I found a couple that I think we should buy. So Blondes Have More Fun by Rod Stewart. I'm like, cool, $1. I'll buy it. Everybody knows don't you want my body. So it's like, okay, if you want my body, I don't know, there's probably some other songs on here that I'm maybe familiar with. So for $1, why not jump into that? She says, I also want this. Chuck Mangione, Feels So Good. Everybody knows the big popular song from this. Not that, okay, for $1, yeah, why not? I went ahead and grabbed it. I mean, I was ready to walk out still with nothing, but she's like, well, let's grab some of these dollar records. Living in the USA by Linda Ronstadt. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I think this was about as far as she went. And then I had been looking through the jazz, and I did find a Billy Cobham album that I needed. It was one of the few that I don't have, and it was in great condition. But $22 price tag. I looked it up real quick on Discogs. I'm like, I can get this album $10 shipped most every day of the week. So I passed on that, even though once I determined she was going to buy a couple, I thought, well, maybe I'll go ahead and splurge, support local business, and buy that. But then I said, well, what else is down there? She goes, I don't recognize anything else. So I sat down on the floor and started going through them. I'm like, well, you missed this Linda Ronstadt album. If you're going to get one, you might as well get 2, because this is the one that's got You're No Good. It's got When Will I Be Loved. This one's got a little more hits on it than the other. So I threw that into the mix. And then I'm like, look, you missed the Yellow Jackets album. She's like, I don't know them. I'm like, it's a jazz band, sort of like Spyro Gyra type thing. So I don't have anything by them. I just know who they are. But I'm like, okay, for $1. And it was some of these are in, they just don't look played. And I'm thinking for $1. Whereas some of them do. When I got home and checked out the Chuck Mangione album, I'm like, this may not be fixable. I think I can clean it up, and it might be, but it's going to be poppy. I'm like, Stanley Clarke, more jazz, and I'm like, yeah. So I don't have any Stanley Clarke. There's a couple artists that I don't have in my collection yet, and Stanley Clarke is one of them. And the record, I don't know. Nobody played the jazz records. The cover looks a little beat up, but I'm like, for $1, I'm grabbing some Stanley Clarke for $1. So then, as I said, I sat on the floor and started doing that. She's looking through the jazz up top. She's like, well, I want this Najee album. It's only $6. I'm like, sure, why not? One of her favorite sax players in the jazz field. So I'm like, sure. And again, pristine condition. Grab that. She's like, was there anything you wanted? Because at this point, I had nothing aside from giving her a couple of dollar albums. And I'm like, well, there was one album over there that was probably a good deal. I mean, since like I say, I wasn't planning on buying anything. I was ready to walk out of there. But since she had to buy something, I thought, well, I might as well pitch in something that I want to buy. She's like, well, go and get it. And so I went over there, and when I went to find it again, I noticed some other ones that I somehow missed. This is what I wanted, though, was a 38 special. I'm like, okay, it was like, I don't know, $10. It was in great condition. Rocking into the night. This is Stone Cold Believer. This is where they started to, get into becoming more popular. Started getting hits on the radio, probably, in the 80s when the MTV started pushing them over. But this was like, I saw this and I'm like, okay, that'd be nice to have. I need to fill in some of my 38 special collection. I think I have one album, one of their later albums, is the only one I've got currently on vinyl. So I thought, well, I wouldn't mind getting this. But like I said, then I'm looking for this, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. How did I miss these? The first 38 Special album. Again, they were all well priced. They were all in excellent. I pulled this out, and when it's open on the top like that, I thought, for me, that's a sign that somebody's taking care of their records. It's like brand new. I had this on CD. It was reissued like 15 or so years ago, and I bought it because I don't think I'd ever heard it before. But this is the early days when they were still, pretty solid Southern rockish, Skinnerty type feel versus what they went to when they became more of a pop side of things. So I thought, well, this would be, they even look like Skinner. Look at that. Van Zandt brother there. And I thought, well, shoot. Now I'm perplexed. Wait a minute. What? What the heck? Special delivery. I'm like, how did I miss these when I flipped through these the first times? The second 38 Special album. And again, great condition. Again, I had this on CD, but at some point I sold it because I guess the CD became a little more valuable, and I sold it to somebody at some point. So I'm like, yeah. And then I'm like, she's like, well, pick one of your favorite 1-3s. And I'm like, well, you really got to buy them all together because they're all like the 3 in a row type thing. Anyway, we went ahead and bought it. Oh, wait a minute. There's Special Forces. So I thought, okay, I'm going to fill in my 38 Special real quick. And we went ahead and splurged and got it. It was weird. They didn't have Wide Eyed Southern Boys, which would be the one in between that and this. Probably the most popular album by them. And probably, I want to get it eventually, but it's one of the ones I don't have. The only other one I have is a little later than this one. I forget exactly the one. But so, yeah, they didn't have Wide Eyed Southern Boys, but then they jumped forward to Special Forces. So, this is a guy Caught Up in You. And, so they're still riding a wave of popularity here. So, yeah, Wide Eyed Southern Boys would fill in that gap. And then I'm not sure. I think there's maybe one or two later ones that would kind of complete the set. There wasn't a whole lot they did after that. But I thought, okay, well, they're a decent price. So we went ahead and got those and supported local business. And so some of the stuff was reasonable, and a lot of the stuff, which I guess it seemed like everything that would fall into the metal category was, to me, overpriced. They had a Raven album. I already had it, but still they had it. And it was $30 or something. Just like some of the prices were like, for these OG copies, I don't think there's anything special about them to make them worth that. Most of these you can buy every day of the week for in the $20 realm, brand new, remastered, whatever. There's just whatever. I don't know if they just don't know much about metal or they just were priced them a little bit crazy, but they had some rock and some classic rock. I made the switch over. So anyway, that was it. Just some fun stuff. May or may not pop back in there occasionally. They look like they might have been fairly new. The sign on the door just said used and new records. I didn't see any new records. New and used records. And cassettes. They had some cassettes and some CDs. Mostly records. But I don't recall seeing anything new. Nothing seemed new. Maybe it was new CDs. I don't know. That's it though. Just a little bit of fun over the weekend, and, got some fillers there for the collection. And that's it for this one. Thanks a lot for watching. Rock on and rock hard.